I did not know on my wedding night that there were rules. I did not know that what I was about to experience was not simply the natural unfolding of a married relationship, but the enforcement of a very specific set of expectations that had been passed down through generations, never discussed, never written down, but absolutely binding. I was 19 years old, and nobody had ever told me what was supposed to happen or what was not supposed to happen in the marriage bed. I simply knew through a kind of cultural osmosis that my body now belonged to my husband in a way it had never belonged to anyone before, and that my job was to be available to him in this most intimate space without question, without hesitation, and without ever suggesting that what was happening might need to be negotiated between two people. My name is Hannah. I grew up Old Order Amish in Holmes County, Ohio. I married at 19 and left at 27. On this channel, I tell the stories that lived behind closed farmhouse doors. And today I want to talk about 8 specific expectations that governed the intimate life of an Amish marriage. Expectations that I did not understand were not universal until I left and began learning what other marriages actually looked like. The first rule was the most basic one, the foundation that everything else was built on. Submission. A wife's body was not hers, it belonged to her husband. This was stated occasionally from the pulpit, wrapped in scripture about wives submitting to their husbands as the church submits to Christ. But it was also stated through practice, through the assumed right a husband had to his wife's body at any time without negotiation. I did not have the language at 19 to understand that this was unusual. I thought all marriages worked this way. I thought all women learned, as I learned, that their bodies were not fully their own once they were married. The second rule was about frequency. There was an assumption, unspoken but absolutely clear, that a husband had certain needs that a wife was obligated to meet. How often those needs required meeting varied from marriage to marriage, but there was no conception of a wife being permitted to say no with any regularity. Saying no once, as I have talked about before, triggered a response. Saying no regularly was understood as a failure of duty so profound that it warranted intervention from the church. A wife was simply supposed to be available. The assumption was that if you were married, you were available. Your tiredness, your illness, your emotional state, your own desires or lack thereof, none of these things changed the basic obligation. The third rule was about position. There was a very specific understanding of what was appropriate in the marriage bed. The man on top, the woman underneath. This was not presented as one option among many. It was presented as the way things were supposed to be, tied to theology about male leadership and female submission. Other positions were not discussed. They were simply not done, or if they were done in a kind of shameful secrecy, a deviation from what was correct. I did not know until I was out of that marriage that there were other ways to be intimate. I thought the way I had learned was simply the way intimacy worked. The fourth rule was about timing. Sex was supposed to happen at night, in bed, in the dark. This was not presented as a preference. It was presented as the way things were done. Sex was not discussed during the day. Sex was not something you planned or talked about. It simply happened in the darkness, and then it was over, and you did not speak of it. The idea that a couple might discuss what they wanted, might choose a time that worked for both of them, might do something other than what they had always done, was not part of the framework. The fifth rule was about procreation. Sex was understood, fundamentally, as a means to children. Yes, it was also a way for a husband to meet his needs, but the purpose was tied always to the possibility of pregnancy. This meant that the more children a woman had, the more pregnancies she endured, the more her body was treated as a resource for reproduction. There was no discussion of family planning, of spacing children out, of a woman's health being a factor in deciding how many children to have. You had children, then you had more children. Your body recovered or it did not, but either way the process continued. The sixth rule was about post-birth expectations. I have talked about this before, but it is important to understand it as a rule, not simply as something that happened. There was an assumption that a wife would resume sexual availability within a few days or weeks of giving birth, depending on the recovery and depending on what the husband believed was reasonable. There was no concept of a woman's body needing time to heal, of postpartum being a vulnerable state, of a wife needing care and rest rather than sexual availability. The rule was simple. You gave birth, you recovered enough to function, you became available again. The seventh rule was about menstruation. During a woman's cycle, there were restrictions. Some of these were religious, based on Old Testament purity laws. Some were simply practical, based on the discomfort involved. But what was never questioned was that a woman's cycle was something that happened to her body, that she had to manage, that she had to work around in terms of availability. There was no discussion of the man being patient during these times, of the woman being cared for. There was simply the understanding that this was a temporary obstacle to her usual availability, and that the obstacle needed to be managed as quickly and quietly as possible. The eighth rule was about secrecy and silence. What happened in the marriage bed was never discussed, not with your mother, not with your sisters, not with your friends. You did not ask questions about what was normal or expected. You did not express preferences. You did not complain. If something felt wrong or painful or violating, you endured it silently and prayed that God would give you strength to accept it. The bedroom was a private place, but not private in the sense of being a safe space for negotiation. It was private in the sense of being a place where what happened stayed hidden, where no one outside the marriage could see or judge or intervene. What I did not understand, living inside these rules, was that they were not natural laws. They were not the inevitable way intimate relationships had to work. They were a very specific cultural product designed to maintain a particular kind of power structure, designed to ensure that a woman's body remained under her husband's control, designed to make it impossible for a wife to establish any kind of agency or autonomy in the most intimate aspect of her marriage. I think about how these rules were enforced. Not through explicit statements usually, rarely through direct threats. Instead, they were enforced through the culture I grew up in, through the sermons I heard, through the examples I saw, through the complete absence of any alternative framework. I never heard a woman describe her marriage bed as a place of mutual pleasure or negotiation. I never heard a wife talk about what she wanted. I never heard anyone suggest that intimacy should be something both people wanted equally. All of these absences taught me what I needed to know about what was acceptable to discuss and what was not. By the time I was in my marriage, these rules had become so normalized that I did not experience them as rules at all. I experienced them as simply the way things were. When my body hurt, I thought that was normal. When I did not want intimacy and my husband did, I thought my not wanting it was the problem, not his expectations. When I was exhausted or sick or grieving and my husband still expected to be available to him, I thought this meant I was weak for not being strong enough to meet his needs. It was not until I left, not until I started talking to women who had grown up in other cultures, other families, other religions, that I realized these were not universal expectations. I realized that the idea of a woman's body belonging to her husband, that the idea of a wife not having the right to say no, that the idea of sex being something that happened to a woman rather than something two people chose together, these were specific to my community. These were enforced through very specific theological interpretations. And they were not the only way a marriage could work. After I left, I went to therapy, and I spent a long time processing what these rules had meant for my body, my sense of self, my understanding of consent and autonomy. My therapist explained to me that what I had experienced was a kind of sexual coercion that was so normalized in my community that it had never felt like coercion at all. It had felt like duty. It had felt like love. It had felt like the price of being a wife. But it was not love. Love requires consent. Love requires the freedom to say no. Love requires two people choosing each other, not one person obligated to make themselves available to another. I want to be careful here because I know that there are people from Amish communities watching this, and I do not want to suggest that every single person in an Amish marriage experiences what I experienced. There is diversity within Amish communities. There are marriages where a couple has found ways to negotiate some of these rules, where a wife has more agency, where a husband is more considerate. I am not saying that all Amish marriages are the same, but I am saying that the cultural framework I grew up in made these 8 rules the default. And for a woman like me, living in a conservative district, married to a man who believed these rules were right and good, there was no escape from them except to leave entirely. What I want to say to anyone watching this who grew up with similar rules, who grew up believing that your body was not fully yours, that your right to say no was limited or non-existent, who grew up thinking that intimacy was something that happened to you rather than something you chose. You deserve better. Your body belongs to you. Your right to say no is absolute. Consent is not a one-time agreement made on your wedding day. Consent is something that happens in every moment, and you have the right to withdraw it at any time for any reason without explanation. The fact that you were taught otherwise does not make it true. The fact that everyone around you seemed to accept these rules does not make them right. The fact that religious scripture was used to justify them does not make them God's will. These are human interpretations, human structures designed to keep women compliant and men in control. And you are allowed to reject them. This is my story. If it stayed with you, tell me in the comments and subscribe if you want to keep hearing the truth from behind the prayer cap.